we have another exciting guest for you. This time, we have a former sheriff and a current county commissioner. He has got another perspective to share with you to give you what it's like being a sheriff and also what it was like becoming a county commissioner and passing a constitutional county resolution in his county. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Sheriff Brad Rogers.
Okay, where's my clicker at? It's not up here on the... Well, thank you. It's good to be here with you. And I am not a current sheriff. I am retired, but people still refer to me as sheriff. In fact, they call me lots of other names too. But anyways, I'm currently a county commissioner of Elkhart County, Indiana. And I'm trying to see, I have a PowerPoint, but I'm trying to get my clicker up here. I don't see it up here, gentlemen. Oh, here it is. It was on the floor, sorry. Okay. All right, so that shows that I used to be sheriff because I changed a little bit with the facial hair. I have 38 years of law enforcement experience, and the experience that guided my path, I wouldn't say I was always a constitutional officer, because you go to the police academy and they teach you some nonsense stuff, but there was three specific events that occurred while I was on patrol and before I ran for sheriff. That was Ruby Ridge, the Waco disaster with the Branch Davidian compound where the feds came in and killed a lot of people, and Hurricane Katrina and the gun grab as a result of that. So most of you, I think, can remember those those experiences, but those are things that kind of molded me into eventually being elected as sheriff and a constitutional sheriff. I was also lived in Texas for a while, and I was a peace officer in Texas from 1983 to 1987 at the University of Texas Police Department. And then I'm originally from Indiana, so I moved back to Indiana and joined the sheriff's office in 1987. And then I was elected sheriff 2011 to 2018. In Indiana, you have a two-term limit. So I was basically relegated to have to step down from being sheriff. And I went back to the position of captain under the current sheriff. And then I ran for commissioner and was elected commissioner then after that. So December 1st, 2011 is when I had my confrontation with the feds. I'm going to tell you about that here in just a minute. And in 2011, I was the CSPOA Interposer of the Year, which is a great honor. And so currently county commissioner, and I was also a police instructor for 20 years. So let's talk a little bit about most of this. I'm going to go through quickly because you've already, it's been covered in other things. So we know about the oath of office. Basically, it's I, Bradley Rogers, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties of the office of sheriff and to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Indiana, and bear true faith and allegiance to the same, so help me God. The sheriff and each officer, each deputy takes an oath. And the history of the oath in some of the sheriff's offices is less than stellar. And I'll give you an example. When I joined in 1987, the courthouse was right across from the sheriff's office. And as a new deputy, I was paraded across the street to the courthouse, to the clerk's office, where the training sergeant accompanied us to take our oath. The sheriff wasn't with us. And we went to the clerk's office, and basically some clerk, and I'm not downing clerks, but some clerk who just says, okay, raise your right hand. So we raise my right hand, and they go through the oath, And then they said, okay, now you need to sign this document. And they gave me a pen with a plastic flower attached to the end of it to sign my oath of office. There was no pomp and circumstance. There was no education on the Constitution or anything. It was just something we did. We got sworn in. And so what I did when I became sheriff is I started, very much like Sheriff Flowers, I educated my new employees on the Constitution. I gave them a copy of the Constitution. I mean, we ought to at least read it if we're going to have an oath, right? So give them a copy of the Constitution and emphasize the seriousness of the oath. You see, politicians or elected officials can make lots of promises, but there's really only one promise that makes a difference, and that is the oath to protect the Constitution. So who is administering the oath? It does matter. So what I would do is, as sheriff, I could have administered the oath, but I asked the circuit court judge, the highest judge in Elkhart County, if he would administer the oath to my new employees, and he agreed to do so. And so we used his courtroom, and I don't know about it in Florida, but in Indiana, you can only take pictures in courtrooms during two events: adoptions and oath of offices. So I would contact the media, and the media would be there, and the new employees' families, they would show up, and we'd have a really a great time of celebrating this oath of office and making sure that it had such an impact. And then along with that was the pomp and circumstance that came along with it. Oftentimes the new employees would get their picture in the paper that they just took their oath of office, and it punctuated the importance of the oath. And of course we know the purpose of government here, and some of this is review because it's already been covered in previous speakers, but I put this up on the screen because we have the balance of power for specific reasons. And then I say, what is the implications for law enforcement? Because oftentimes we tend to check our mind at the door. And so law enforcement really does have the ability to make an impact with this oath of office stuff. So how many of you have heard this? Your oath says to enforce all laws. Yeah, I've heard it, especially from the left. Commissioner, I think, Hall said the same thing. Your oath says you need to enforce all laws. And then sheriff's deputies and police should not worry about whether a law is constitutional. You should just enforce the law. And then why not let the courts determine if there's a constitutional issue? And lastly, if the legislature passes a law, must you enforce the law if it's unconstitutional? And I'll tell you that I was probably the first labeled constitutional sheriff in Elkhart County, and the media had a real problem with this. They didn't understand, what's this constitutional nonsense? What do you keep talking about that? And so I had a reporter in my office, and I said, okay, because he would often say, why don't you just let the courts determine if a law is constitutional? So I spun it on him, and I said this, okay, so the Indiana legislature passes a law that says reporters cannot allow you to print certain things or publish certain things. And he kind of bristled, with that. And I said, so what would you do if the Indiana legislature passed a law like that? And he thought about it, and he said, I'd print it anyways. And I said, exactly. That's exactly what you do, because you didn't check your mind at the door. You see, the Constitution is meant to be understood by everybody, not just some elitists. So there are some gray areas, of course, but basically there's laws out there that are clearly just unconstitutional. And law enforcement does not have to enforce all laws. We have discretion. And you really want the police to have this discretion, assuming that they have the foundation of the Constitution. Because people who say you need to enforce all laws really don't know what you're asking for. Because there's lots of laws on the books that police could use. And in fact, if any of you have ever gotten a warning for speeding, there's discretion. And so there's an example of an officer not technically enforcing it to the fullest degree. So this leads me to the situation with the federal government. And as a sheriff, I knew that probably sometime in my tenure as sheriff that I would probably run up against the feds. I didn't think it was going to happen this soon. So an Amish farmer contacted me. I don't know if you know a lot about Amish. I don't know if you have any in Florida, but we have to dodge road apples up in Indiana where the horse and buggies are driving along, and you have to dodge those from time to time. But the Amish are very peaceful people. They don't vote, unfortunately. They say they cast their ballot on their knees. But they know a lot about politics, and they're typically conservative, and they're very peaceful people. But the Amish farmer contacted me on December 1st, 2011, and I know that's like 13 years ago, but there's an epilogue to this I'll get to. And he said, I'm having trouble with the feds. Of course, my ears perked up, and I thought, okay, what's the deal? He said, well, come to my house and sit down in my kitchen and we'll talk about this. So I did, and I found out that the FDA, Food and Drug Administration inspectors were coming to his farm, and what this Amishman was doing is he had a herd of cattle, or herd of cows, basically, and he was selling raw milk, which we know is a terrorist activity. He was selling raw milk to food co-ops. Now, I'm not a member of a food co-op, but maybe some of you are, and food co-ops are not really considered the public. It's a private organization where you have to pay a subscription, and you get naturally grown organic vegetables, and you get raw milk and other types of things. And it's, people know what they're getting when they get this. Anyways, he was selling this sometimes across state lines, and somehow this triggered an investigation with the feds. So the inspectors were coming in, and typically the FDA will inspect a dairy farm annually, and it's pretty perfunctory, it's just routine, and they give them a clean bill of health and they go on. Well, they ended up targeting this Amish farmer, and they end up, sometimes every 2 weeks, they were coming in to harass this farmer. And basically the farmer said to me, he said, Sheriff, I'm tired of these guys coming in harassing me. I'd like to withdraw my consent to have any further searches. And he said, can you help me? And I said, absolutely. So he had been called by the Department of Justice to a grand jury in Detroit, Michigan. Of course, Detroit, Michigan is outside of Elkhart County. Elkhart County borders the northern border of Indiana into Michigan, but obviously Detroit, Michigan is outside of my jurisdiction. And so I consulted with Sheriff Mack at the time with CSPOA, and I had read his books, and that was probably some of the first contacts I'd had with Sheriff Mack, and a great friend that he is, and consulted me with great vigor. And so we put together an email because I didn't have any physical contact with any of these feds, but I had their names. And so we put together an email to the Department of Justice trial attorney who was doing the grand jury, and we'll get to that in a second. And then we also got a response from the Department of Justice as well that I also consulted Mac on. So here's the email. Let's just read it together. I say, Dear Mr. Goldstein, I understand that you've made recent requests to David Hosteller in Forest Grove Dairy for documents and to appear before a grand jury, and he has a number of inspections and attempted inspections on his farm on County Road 43 in Middlebury, Indiana, within Elkhart County. This is notice that any further attempts to inspect this farm without a warrant signed by a judge based on probable cause will result in federal inspectors' removal or arrest for trespassing by my officers or I. In addition, if any further action is taken by the federal government on Mr. Hosteller while he is in Elkhart County, I will expect that you or federal authorities contact my office prior to such action. I will expect you to forward this information to your comrades in the FDA. Sincerely, Bradley Rogers, Sheriff, Elkhart County. Now, as you might have guessed, the federal government doesn't take lightly of getting poked in the eye. So I got this long dissertation from Mr. Goldstein from the Department of Justice a short time later. And we won't read it all, but basically it says, it's very condescending, and it's basically it says, "Dear Sheriff Rogers, the United States is in receipt of your email communication to me of this afternoon regarding an ongoing federal criminal investigation." And he wanted to clarify some things, of course. "I begin with the main thrust of your email. Your notice that any further attempts to inspect this farm without a warrant signed by a local judge based on probable cause will result in federal inspectors' removal or arrest for trespassing by my officers or I, since you cite no legal authority. I assume that by trespassing you're referring to Indiana state law, Indiana code," and he gives the code. "However, the Constitution of the United States provides that," and notice the quote, "the laws of the United States, ... shall be the supreme law of the land." Now, he left something out there, and we're going to get into that in a second. And then he goes, and because he goes into a lot of nonsense about the administrative code and different things like that. And around the second to the last paragraph, he says, "I should also note that the refusal to permit entry or inspection authorized by Section 374 is in itself a federal criminal offense, which under certain circumstances is a felony punishable by imprisonment for up to 3 years. What was he doing? He was threatening me. And I hope this information clears up any confusion you may have. And then he said, "Oh, and can you please put me in touch with your county attorney? Because you're just a lowly sheriff. I need to talk to a legal scholar." So, and then signed Ross Goldstein. So, well, first of all, let's look at the Supremacy Clause and what in the response. He says, "The Constitution of the United States provides that the laws of the United States, ... shall be the supreme law of the land." And what's he missing? Well, yeah, in pursuance of, that's right. And the U.S. Constitution, he goes on, "The Supremacy Clause has been interpreted since the earliest days of the nation to mean that federal law trumps state law whenever the two conflict." And I said, nonsense. That just doesn't happen. And then, of course, he goes on, it says, "Because it is federal law, indeed an act of Congress, that the FDA may do so lawfully without regard to Indiana law to the contrary," and of course, and I add, "and without a warrant," or what the Constitution has to say about this. So, and then he offers the punishment. So, of course, we know that the Supremacy Clause really says, it has the phrase, "which shall be made in pursuance thereof." Now, he purposely omitted that, which tells me that he knew deep down that he was treading on thin ice. So only laws made in pursuance of the Constitution really become supreme, and you all know that by now. So back to the response, a threat of incarceration, and then he wanted to see my county attorney. Well, my response back to him was, "Well, thank you for your kind letter, but I am the sheriff of Elkhart County, Indiana. My attorney works for me, and my order still stands." So there we go. So I ask, will I stand by while my citizens, even the ones that don't vote, citizens' rights are being abused? I could not stand before my wife, my children who I've homeschooled and taught the Constitution, and you know, I will not stand by while people's rights are being abused. So even if the feds came after me, and I knew it was a real possibility, and they incarcerated me, I could stand before my God and before my people with a clear conscience. Now, you might say, "Well, I don't have the FDA." Well, you have the IRS, and both Mac and I would have loved to arrest an IRS agent. The BLM, Bureau of Land Management out west, and any of your ABC agencies out there, you as sheriff are going to have to deal with. So, let's look at what happened with the epilogue. After that letter and my response on December 5th, remember December 1st was the email. On December 5th, the farmer received a certified letter dismissing him from the grand jury. Now, there was no SWAT team. I didn't pull any guns. There was no violence. And I'm not a big tough guy, but I just stood my ground and I said, you're not going to do this in this county without consequences. So draw your own conclusions. They would argue that maybe they just decided not to pursue it, but I think it was because we had a sheriff that had backbone and willing to stand up for his citizens. And you don't need a SWAT team to get that done. Now, I checked with the farmer before I came to this conference, and to this day, this is 2024, so it's been 13 to 14 years later, the FDA has not been back to this farm to inspect it. And I might add, the farmer's business has almost tripled because of the publicity in the natural food industry. And quite frankly, if you search Sheriff Brad Rogers, FDA, you'll see that in the natural food industry, I'm some sort of folk hero out there because of what I did. But quite frankly, I'm no hero. I was just doing my job, upholding the oath of office. So, the sheriff that replaced me was a captain at the time I did this. And he's currently the sheriff. And he remains vigilant at this time. He might not be quite in your face like I was, but he didn't enforce the mask mandates and after I was done being sheriff and this COVID nonsense happened. And so I'm confident that he would follow up if the FDA started harassing this farmer again. So the thing that I wanted is, this is an example that lights a flame for the future. You see, I had a chief deputy who will probably never run for sheriff, but he said to me after he saw this, he said, "Sheriff, I've never seen anything like this." And he said, "I would have never dreamed of doing this until I saw your example." You see, that's what it's all about, is as sheriffs, as constitutional sheriffs, we can set the example for future leaders and future generations. And so then I want to tell you about another situation that I had as a sheriff. This was a little bit less major, but for people who were involved in this, it's quite a serious situation. We had a neighborhood outside the municipal limits of Elkhart, Indiana, that actually had city sewer. And for a variety of reasons, the commissioners probably 40 years ago decided to work with the city of Elkhart to extend city sewer to these about 94 houses out in this area because of failing septic systems. This is done from time to time, and it's a cooperative effort between the city and the county. But we had a mayor that came in and realized that the people out in the county were not paying their fees properly. And it's no fault of theirs. It was probably just something that got lost in the shuffle or whatever. It was an auditor issue. And so the mayor decided, well, we're going to disconnect all of these sewers since they're not paying for it. And the neighborhood was, what happens if that happens? I mean, we wouldn't have any sewer. And so they contacted me, the sheriff, and I said, absolutely, I can help. Because see, the constitutional principle here is due process. There was no due process. We had a mayor who had a power-hungry situation. He says, I'm disconnecting. He unilaterally made the decision. I'm disconnecting these sewers. And I said, no, you're not. And so on the day of disconnect, I found out the backhoes were coming down the street. I parked my squad car on the first disconnect, and I said, you're going to have to go through my hood to get to it. So that didn't happen. The mayor said to the city chief, go arrest the sheriff. the city chief says, I'm not arresting the sheriff, no way. And so today, the city has a different mayor because he lost his next election, and the sheriff protects. So all those people have their problems solved. So again, the sheriff intervention, today the sewers are still connected, and the sheriff protected citizens' rights. You see, that's what a sheriff is all about. Yeah, we arrest bad guys from time to time, but we also can protect people's rights, oftentimes from government themselves. And then lastly, another quick story is we had a complaint about a home Bible study, and the zoning would allow, like, I don't know, if you got a bunch of vehicles in the neighborhood, that violated some zoning law. I'm not sure what it was, but anyways, this Bible study had like 4 to 6 vehicles, and I checked it out. There was nothing going on. There was no traffic being blocked or anything. And so the neighbors complained to zoning. The zoning was investigating and told the homeowner to cease and desist. So I was contacted then by the homeowner, and I got with zoning, and I said, you don't want to go here, because if I get involved, it's going to be a real political mess for the zoning department. And I said, you're violating the rights for the First Amendment rights to have a Bible study in their house. They backed off, and basically the Bible study continued. So there's another quick example, all right? Now, as sheriff, President Obama was in office the first part of when I was in office, and there was always, although Obama never did this, there was always a rumor that he was going to file an executive order to seize firearms. So I was on a PBS station, and I was on some panel, and they asked me, what would you do if the president issued an executive order to seize firearms? And I said I would promptly ignore it, because the president of the United States has no authority on county government or the sheriff. And so as a result of it, I ended up on Fox and Friends, and had to and provided the explanation for that. And then I was also on Anderson Cooper's 360 program, and of course I was kind of in a lion's den on that. But the primary duty of the sheriff is to protect people from criminals, protect people from overreaching government, and to be a peace officer and be a sheriff of the people. Keep your oath and be a constitutional sheriff. And even those who are elected, like the auditor and clerk, they still have constitutional issues that they can be involved in as well. Now, I'll go through this quickly because I'm running out of time, but there are sheriffs that are whining about losing their authority. And really what you need to do is don't fear the federal government, take your authority back, and be the sheriff that the people want you to be. Now, a word about deputies, though. You can't expect your deputies to, like, for example, run up against the federal government like I did as sheriff. But the communication is the key. If your deputies don't have access to you as a sheriff on something that's really major, that could be a problem. And as sheriff, you might be in jeopardy as a result of that. So you need to have a kind of an up and down communication for your deputies. And I've been called anti-government, but most of us have worked for the government for the last 30 or 40 years. And I'm for the government, but I'm for the proper role of government. The media will peg you as anti-government, but don't let them control the narrative. Be keepers of your oath, and they will paint you as a radical regardless, because apparently being a card in the Constitution is radical. Now, quickly on commissioners, if you can give me just a couple more minutes. Sheriffs and commissioners, or sometimes council members, can work together to protect rights and prevent government overreach. And it requires collaboration, but not compromise of principles, and requires all parties involved to understand the proper role of government. So the importance of locally elected officials that are constitutionally minded is in place here. This is the resolution in 2021 where it says, the Board of County Commissioners of County of Elkhart does hereby commit to stand and defend at all times, whether during a state of emergency or otherwise, the rights and liberties of the persons as guaranteed by the constitutions of the United States and the state of Indiana. And then I won't read it all. I'd be glad to share this with you if you email me. My email is at the end of the presentation. And then the sheriff proclamation is what I wanted to get to on this. Whereas the sheriff of Elkhart County, and this is the sheriff that replaced me, supports the above resolution, and whereas the sheriff has taken an oath of office to support the constitutions of the United States and the state of Indiana, and whereas the sheriff maintains a strong commitment to all the rights of the people, now therefore the following proclaimed by the sheriff does hereby support the declaration of Elkhart County as a county dedicated to the principles contained in the Constitution of the United States and the state of Indiana, and the sheriff does hereby commit to stand and defend at all times, whether during a state of emergency or otherwise, the rights and liberties of the persons and individuals in Elkhart County as guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States and state of Indiana. And this was signed by myself and 2 other commissioners at the time. Now, the reason I bring this up as well is, you see, we did a lot of this, and this was right after I was done being sheriff. The commissioners at the time did a lot of this nonsense, and it happened, throughout the nation. Not 2 months after we passed that Constitution resolution by all 3 of the commissioners, 2 of them are left-leaning. I was the conservative one that brought them towards the center. Not 2 months later, Biden comes out with his vaccine mandate that says any company over, I think it was 300, you had to have a vaccine mandate. And we had 800 county employees. And so the other 2 commissioners, after signing that resolution, they were going, yeah, we need to create policy on how we do this. I said, whoa, we just signed a Constitution resolution. County attorney who works for me, and he was the one that was bringing this to us. I said, county attorney, you send President Biden the middle finger emoji. We're not going to do this in our county. And it never happened. And of course, as you know, it was overturned in court, and but the other commissioners backed off after I said that. So now I'm a county commissioner. I empathize with Commissioner Hall. I'm telling you, we need good county commissioners to partner with good sheriffs to give us liberty and freedom, because I don't care who's in the office of presidency. I mean, yeah, Trump would be nice, but I'm telling you, there was issues even with President Trump, not because of him necessarily, but because of the bureaucracy of federal government. And so no matter who's in office, locally elected officials are where the liberty can be protected. Please contact me at brogers@elkhartcounty.com. It's been an honor. Thank you so much.